new start, new passage. Theology of worship, liturgical preaching. A picture. Let's start with a picture. Contrast between present day and ancient world. If you wanted to meet with President Obama, you'd have Buckley's chance of doing so. Our public officials, our leaders, are basically inaccessible to us. In fact, there's much of the minding of leaders is to protect them from unrestricted access, or people's unrestricted access to them. So it wouldn't be possible for you to go to Washington and knock at the White House and say, I'd like to meet with President Obama. You might like to, but they'd be very suspicious of you.
Unless you're a Muslim brother.
Yes. Okay. It's almost impossible to have access to our leaders. Even people who are in Senate, many of them have never ever had access to your head of state. There's very few people that have access to head of state. And the kind of access is kind of, you have these television interviews which are staged, and you know how phony they are, how staged they are, but there's no direct access. Where there is access, it's managed access. I fancy that the only person who has access in any meaningful way to your president is the president's chief of staff, politically.
And his caddy.
And his caddy, yes, but he has to shut up. As soon as if the caddy used his position to try and work him, do you know what happened to him? He wouldn't be that, but he'd be thatted. That would be the end of cadding, at least for this guy. Even Michelle, the protocol is that our president's wife has access to the president as a person, but doesn't have access to the president in an official capacity. Hillary got into a lot of trouble years ago when the other Clinton was in office because she was perceived to abuse her position to gain access to her husband, to lobby him for her particular pet causes. Now, that's modern reality, and I'm not lamenting it, it's just the way the system is stacked. But it does mean that it's stacked to the advantage of the leader, at least potentially, and our disadvantage. However, things were different in the ancient world with kings. You got rid of kings and ended up with something far worse than kings, a president. Now, that's me speaking as a monarchist from the other side. It's a joke, just in case you're worried about it. Everywhere in the ancient world, but say ancient Israel, the kings and rulers made themselves accessible, available to their citizens. Now, there was a certain protocol about it, and any person who didn't make himself available to his citizens, any king, was in trouble. So you have the story at the end of David's life.
Yeah.
Remember? Yeah, do you remember there? Yeah, just tell.
Keeping him away.
What?
He was keeping him away.
Yes.
Go see him.
Yes. Who was it? Absalom. Now, there were the daily audiences of the king with his people, and he was either trying to throw them away and said, look, there's no point in going to the king. He won't give you a hearing. But if I was a king, I would listen to you. Or people who'd come from the audience with the king, he'd work on them, say, oh, how did things go? The king didn't decide in my favour. He said, oh, what a shame. If only I was a king, things would be different. You'd have I would really listen to you. He doesn't really listen to you. Now, this would happen in two ways. And for the following passage, you need to get this picture in your mind. First of all, in the royal palace, there was a throne room. A throne room. A big room. We know about it in Kings. When David built his palace, there's a description of the throne room. The main dominant feature of the throne room was a throne, which is a chair, the way throne with sides, backrest, side arms, usually on a podium. Now, I won't give you the full picture, but just the most important parts. You'd have one entrance, and you'd have bodyguards here, and you'd have bodyguards here. Not exactly that position, but somewhere there, protecting the king just in case his life was threatened if somebody drew a dagger or wanted to explode a bomb. Now, you're still awake. Okay, now, people who wanted to meet with the king for usually one of two reasons would line up on particular days. So this didn't happen every day, but maybe, let's say, one day a week. Or, if the king was absent because he was travelling around the kingdom or he was involved in foreign visit or warfare, it wouldn't happen. But let's just say normal, regular time, the king might be available once a week. Let's say he's available Wednesdays. Okay, that's audience day. The king seated on his throne. Now, throne was the symbol of the throne is very important in this because the throne is the place where you have access to the king and you can plead with the king for two very precious things. Can you work out what they are? Mercy. Well, if we take mercy in what case? If you're guilty, you could plead for mercy, and then you would have grace. You would be pardoned, and it wouldn't just be guilty of crime, but let's say you couldn't pay taxes, and the king would then say, okay, forget about taxes for this year. So, mercy. What else?
Justice.
What?
Justice.
Justice. These are closely connected. And thirdly?
Petitions.
For what?
Asks for
Your
resources.
Resources, charity. Let's just call it welfare. What we'd call welfare. In the ancient world, it would be, the technical term was alms, charity, welfare. Let's just call it welfare to put it in modern sense. A handout, some help for the king. Now, you could approach, let's say, for example, yes, I was a widow, couldn't look after my children. I could come to the king and ask for a handout. Now, the king was technically, now in Israel particularly, was supposed to be the champion of the poor and oppressed, which means particularly widows and orphans. If we had the case of mercy, if I didn't get justice in the local court and went against me, I could jump the local court and go to the Supreme Court, which was the king, and I could plead for justice to the king. Now, you get the basic picture? Okay? So, if you're in trouble and need some help, you go to the king to get help. If you have experienced injustice, you go to the king for justice. If you have things are hard for you, you plead to the king for mercy. Which means, say, if you've been punished, you've committed a crime, but in most cases it had to do with taxes, debts to the king. Now, okay, what would happen was that you'd line up, and maybe there'd be royal officials who'd take you in turn, and then you'd go one by one into the presence of the king. You'd come in, and what would you do when this is the podium here. What would you do when you came into the presence of the king? You wouldn't just bow. You wouldn't just kneel. You'd prostrate yourself before the king, right? Like a Muslim, flat on the ground. And the king then would go like that. He would lift up your countenance. Does that ring a bell? The Lord bless you and keep you. Lift up your countenance. He'd lift up your countenance. Say, okay, get up. Yeah, now what do you want? And then you put it to you, and then he'd make a decision. And some cases, his advisors would brief people beforehand, and they'd screen out the frivolous cases. So they were genuine cases. They had a chance of being heard, this screening out. But you would approach the throne to receive what? Grace and mercy. And that's this in connection here too. You'd approach the throne to receive grace and mercy from an earthly king. Get the basic picture? And so when people in Israel thought about throne, they didn't think about throne as the seat of power. They didn't think about the White House or the Supreme Court. They thought about the throne as the place where the king would help out his citizens, give them a helping hand in their need, where the king would function as the father of the nation. And if the king didn't do this, if he didn't make himself available, he'd get into a lot of trouble with his people, and there wouldn't be long before a rebellion would be fermenting within the kingdom. Now, this was the regular thing. So you have the throne room with the throne, and you'd approach the king. Now, there was a technical term that was used here. You would pros urchamai. Urchamai is to come, and pros is to. You would come into the pros urchamai. You would approach the king. You would approach the throne, and you would seek mercy and grace from the king. Do you get the basic language? You would come into the presence of the king. Now, there's a bit of a problem in practical terms. Now, let me just do a little bit of riff on the side. A lot of people couldn't come to the palace of the king. They couldn't visit Jerusalem to come to there because they lived up in Galilee or something like that. So the king would have a circuit every year where he'd do a circuit around his kingdom, partly to check up on the officials and deal with corruption and all that kind of stuff. You've got to fly the flag if you're going to be successful as a politician or even as a pastor. You've got to fly the flag. Okay, so he goes there, and his coming would be announced in advance by a herald who'd blow a golden trumpet, and that trumpet would be the signal that a royal visit was about to take place. A royal visit? Let's say the king came to Fort Wayne. King Obama came to Fort Wayne, and the trumpets would sound, and people know when they heard the trumpet, the king's coming, and he would come to, probably there wouldn't be a building big enough, but he'd come to, there's no one central square in Fort Wayne, is there?
Memorial Coliseum.
Oh, well, let's say go to the Colosseum, and the people around the king would have a portable throne. His throne would be set up in the Colosseum, and then you would be all lined up, and you could
See the Caesar.
See the Caesar.
In the Coliseum.
Okay, in the well, yes. Yes, meet the lions, or meet the lion. Okay, do you get the basic picture? Now, there is a bit of a problem because if you've never seen the king, no matter how bold you are, what's the basic problem going to be when you come there? Fear and trembling. And what's that going to be translated into? Weakness and okay, that's not bad, but how would that sabotage your cause? Uncertainty, which would be then evident in your silent tongue. You'd find it very difficult to speak and to put into words what you wanted to say. And so if I can do another side riff, it'll be very helpful for you if you came to make a petition to the king and you had an advocate, a paraclete, who would speak for you or stand by you or brief you, give you the words to say. The Holy Spirit, the paraclete, that's the picture there, amongst other things. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the fact that it's a terrifying experience and you'll be tongue-tied. What you need to have, if you're going to be effective, is to be able to speak loudly and clearly and confidently. You're likely to get a good hearing. So, throne, king, appealing to the king for grace and mercy, and the word for that confident speech in Greek is paresia. Now, paresia meant freedom of speech. I've got it written out there. Raisia is speaking. Par is across, towards. So the basic notion of paresia is freedom of speech. Now, how was it used in the ancient world, in the Greco-Roman world? Number one, it was the term that was used within the assemblies of the Greek city-states, where all free citizens had the freedom to speak in the public assembly. Slaves, women had to shut up. But every citizen, every male citizen above the age of 20 had paresia, had freedom of speech in a public assembly. You got the basic picture? Freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want to, and people shut up and you get a hearing. Then from there, it's the freedom of speech in approaching a public official like a king. And that's a secular usage then. And then it's used elsewhere in the ancient world, Old Testament, for freedom of speech before God in the Last Judgment. Sinners do not have paresia, freedom of speech. Or in Leviticus 27, the Hebrew is God. One of the blessings that God gives to them is that He will dwell in their midst, and they will walk with their heads held high. They won't be slaves anymore. Walk with their heads held high in God's presence. They won't approach God as slaves, but as sons. That's translated in the Septuagint as paresia. So they will walk in God's presence. They will live in God's presence, not as slaves grovelling on the ground, but as sons who stand and speak freely to their Father. Which leads then to the third level of meaning for paresia, which is then the freedom of speech to approach God. The freedom of speech to approach God, normally translated, and the picture then is lost. Okay, and it's hard to see. It's translated as boldness or confidence. Let us with boldness or with confidence approach the throne of grace. The term is freedom of speech, free speech. That includes boldness, that includes confidence, but it's quite concretely focused on speaking. Now, let's read the section that follows the one that we've been looking at in chapter 4, which is a conclusion from the fact, talking about entering God's rest, the place of rest with God, by listening to God, and then God doing His work in us, the heavenly surgeon performing his operation and healing our spiritual sickness, healing our hearts then. This is the new section. And it's not a complete break, but it follows immediately on this. We read chapter 4, 14 through to 16. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens into God's presence, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession, for we do not have a priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted like us, as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, that's the second let us, the second hortatory subjunctive, let us then with confidence, paresia, let us with freedom of speech, bold speech, confident speech, freedom of speech, draw near to the throne of grace. Approach the throne of grace, parochamai, draw near, come near to the throne of grace. Notice it's not the throne of the judge, it's the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need, or receive well-timed help or timely help. Okay, let's unpack this. So, first of all, what's worship, according to Hebrews? Is coming into the heavenly place of rest to enjoy a time and place of rest by listening to the Word of God. The second aspect of the divine service is coming to the throne of grace to receive grace and mercy from God. You go to church not in order to do something, but to receive, not just something, receive everything you could possibly wish for and hope for. Not with fear and trembling, but with paresia, freedom of speech, bold speech, confident speech. So, proserchomai, as I've said, is a technical liturgical term that's used 7 times in Hebrews. There's another synonym, egidzo, which means to also to approach, that I think Hebrews uses to avoid having 8 approaches. He loves numbers. There's a whole heap of lists of things, that are 7s or 10s or 12s. And sometimes you have 6s, and if you have a 6, what's implied? There's another one coming that is not stated. 7 is the complete picture, the full deal. If you have 6, it means incomplete. That's a number symbolism in the ancient world. So proserchomai is a technical liturgical term coming from the Old Testament, and it was used in the Septuagint for approaching God at the tabernacle. And it was used both for the priests who approached God and for the people who approached God. And the place where people approach God, the throne of grace, where the people and the priests came to God, was not where you would expect the Holy of Holies, but was the altar for burnt offering. Temple precincts, you have altar here, Holy of Holies here, wash basin here. Where is the place that people come into the face of God, meet with God, approach God? It's here, the altar. That's the meeting point. God, and according to Exodus, worship has to do with God holding an audience with his people in order that he can meet with them. So if you like the picture, God comes from here to here, and the people come and the priests come here to do what? To meet with God. So they come near, they draw near, they approach the throne, the altar. Proserchomai in the Old Testament It's used here in Hebrews 7 times for the congregation's approach to God in his heavenly sanctuary. Not in the temple in Jerusalem, not in the tabernacle, but it's a term that's used for people coming near, approaching God, his throne of grace. Now the key term here in Hebrews is the noun paresia, free speech, boldness in speaking, and it's used 4 times in all, very significant locations that you need to look at yourself. Just to repeat what I said, the term was used commonly in contemporary Greek, 1st century AD, for the right of free speech in a public citizens' assembly of a Greek city-state. So Greeks were democracies. In autocracies, only one voice is heard. Whose voice is heard in an autocracy? The autocrat, the dictator. Even when it poses to be a democracy, there's one voice that's heard and there's no other voice. In a democracy, and this was Greek democratic theory, not everybody had a voice, but every adult male had a voice and had a right to speak and had an equal right to speak. Everybody's voice was equally important. If you know anything of Greek history and Greek literature and stuff that comes out of this, this lies at the heart of Greek thinking. It wasn't just Athens that was a free city-state, but the Greeks established free city-states all around the Mediterranean world, in the ancient world. Immensely successful forms of social organisation in their day. And if you go to Athens to the present day, you can go to below the Acropolis, down below Mars Hill, and there's the area which was held for the public assembly, and you can still see the speaker's podium, the place where you put up your hand and you say, I want to speak, and you'd line up and you'd have your say on the podium, okay? The right of free speech in the public assembly. Now, as I said, then it shifted from that, beyond that, to the freedom of speech in the public domain anywhere, not just in an assembly, but public speaking. All of you know how terrifying public speaking is for you, let alone most people. Public speaking is very difficult. Just to be in public and the potential for shaming that comes in public speaking. Most people, even these days when people are trained in school to speak, some public speak, you put most people in front of an audience and they freeze. And one of the things that you need to do that seminary needs to do is to help to overcome that fear of public speaking. And if you supervise vicars, one of the most important skills that they need to develop is the ability to do what I'm doing, which is not just to speak in public, but to speak on your feet. To speak on your feet. What I'm doing now is paresia. Right? It's public. It's a restricted public, mind you. There's not many critics here. There's not too many people that are going to throw eggs and rotten tomatoes at me. At least I hope not. That's tomorrow.
None in the back.
Bananas.
Oh, there's some back there, are there? I'll bring an umbrella tomorrow. No, the right, it's not only the ability, but the right to speak freely in public. That term is used quite often for preaching. The apostles, who are uneducated men, astonished the intellectuals of their day, the scribes and the Pharisees, because they spoke with, not just with authority, but paresia. The freedom of speech, confident speech. They weren't intimidated by criticism. By the way, paresia is also a gift of the Spirit. Where the Spirit is, the Spirit gives paresia, which means you don't worry about criticism and you're able to speak what the Spirit tells you and shows you to speak. Paresia, freedom of speech, confident speech in public. Then the third level, as I said, is the confident speech to somebody in high office. The confidence to approach Larry Rast or Matt Harrison or the governor of Indiana, or even to approach John Kleinig, that intimidating man. Then it's the confidence in approaching and addressing God. Now, as I said, in the ancient world, kings used to hold a public audience with their citizens on certain occasions at a palace or royal visits, to receive petitions and complaints from them. They sat on their throne in a throne room or in a public place. And the people could approach them and petition them there for mercy and help. So mercy, grace, help, they're the three things. Now, in the Old Testament, God was enthroned on the mercy seat. Notice mercy seat, the hilasterion, in the temple between the cherubim. So the mercy seat was the seat of God's throne. The Ark of the Covenant was the bottom part of the throne. The cherubim were the sides and back of the throne. So that was a stylized throne. There God was enthroned in the Holy of Holies in a dark place. So that's the throne of God, Old Testament. God's throne was the place where God, the Heavenly King, grants grace and mercy to his people. The mercy seat in Israel was the throne of grace. The Israelites faced Jerusalem and they came to the altar in order to address him, not there in this place, but to address him here. But this was not the throne of grace. The throne of grace was here. Now, what's different once again, remember typology, you've always got to think similarities and dissimilarities. Right? You have God's throne. It's a throne of grace. But what's different between the throne of grace, Old Testament, throne of grace, New Testament? Yes?
Is it that the New Testament throne of grace, the altar and the Holy of Holies are together?
Fantastic, you've got it.
Is that what it is?
Right. And what's telescoped is you only have this. And hence our altars are both, stylized Ark of the Covenant, and you get reredos, which, with three things behind, stylized thrones, but they're also altars. The Greek term for altar is bomos, which means it can be used both table and altar. It's table because you eat food from it. It's a table on which you put offerings, but it's also throne. And that's one big difference. What's the other big difference?
What? There's no sacrifice on it.
No sacrifice, good, yes.
Your access to it.
Your access to it, yeah, just unpack that. That's the most significant thing, yes?
Well, you just have free access to come there. You don't have to have anybody before you. You can speak freely as you wish.
Yes.
So
You have open access rather than restricted access. Who alone was allowed to approach the throne of grace, technically? The high priest. Once a year, with severe restrictions. We approach the heavenly throne of grace with boldness, confidence, freedom of speech, no restrictions, and symbolically in our church, therefore, it's not just the mercy seat, the throne and the altar come together in front of the church, but you have the entrance here, you have the open aisle straight to the throne of grace. Now, that's an essential part of every Lutheran, or not every, most Lutheran churches. and of Lutheran theology of worship, approaching the throne of grace with freedom of speech. How's time going? Yes. We have unrestricted access to God on his throne rather than limited access to God. Can I emphasize then the symbolism of the throne is not a power symbol. The throne is not a power symbol in Israel, it is a grace symbol. So if Jesus sits on the throne together with the Father, the primary emphasis is not that Jesus exercises power, political power together with together with God the Father, but that he dispenses grace together with God the Father. Grace, mercy, help in time of need. Now, as God's royal Son, Jesus sits together with God on his heavenly throne and serves as both our priest and our king. He's bridged the gap between God in heaven and on earth by passing through the heavens. Notice that plural thing there? He's passed all the barriers that stand between us on earth and God in heaven. He passes through them all to open up the way to the throne of grace in heaven. He pioneers that way. He is the forerunner along that way into the presence of God the Father. As our high priest, he sympathizes with us and brings us together with himself into the Father's presence. I want to do a little riff on sympathizes with us, but one little thing that I'd like to touch on just here, verse 15, for we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weakness, our inadequacy, but one who in every respect has been tempted like us without sin. So since we have him as our high priest, we have him to lead us to that place, and since he is our high priest and he sits together with his Father on the throne, we needn't be afraid. Why? Because we have our man with God. This is our friend. This is the one who understands us. He sympathizes with us. He sympathizes with us in our temptation. He sympathizes with our weakness. Why does he sympathize with our temptations? He's been there, done that. There's nothing that we suffer that he hasn't suffered. He sympathizes with our weakness. He knows what it's like to be tired and frazzled. He knows what it's like when you're irritated and people get on your goat. He knows what it's like when people abuse you and sin against you, when people scorn you, when people criticize you, when people belittle you. He knows all that. He's experienced all that. And so he can sympathize with you, and he puts in a word for you. And if you come and are afraid, then he will speak up for you. He's your advocate, your intercessor, the one who shares your humanity and my humanity, the one who's been there, done that, suffered that, and understands that, who has not only suffered everything you can possibly suffer, but has suffered much more than anything that you can possibly suffer. None of you can say, as Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? You might feel that, but Jesus didn't just feel that. He went down into hell because of that. None of you have been to hell, have you? I hope not. Never. So, since we have him as our high priest, we can approach God, the heavenly King, with freedom of speech. boldness, confidence, and we can receive mercy. Mercy, pardon for our sin, and acceptance as God's royal sons and daughters, as Christ's brothers. And we can find, and this is a lovely little expression, we can find timely help, usually translated a grace to help in time of need. We have grace, a gift, but it's timely. Can you work out what the notion of timely help is? Grace to help in time of need. Actually, the Greek is oikairos, oikairon, which means well-timed help.
When we absolutely need it.
Yes, it's number one, when we need it.
Not too early and not too late.
Not too early and not too late. What's also? You know, sometimes, and you have this all the time as a pastor, you are impatient and you stuff it up. Why? Because you don't get the timing right. You speak when you should listen. You act when you should wait. You want to intervene before a person's ready to receive the help. It's almost impossible for you and me as pastors and as Christians to give well-timed help. You can only do that if you're guided by the Holy Spirit. Because to deliver well-timed help, you need to be able to go beyond appearances. You need to see what's going on in here. And not only see what's going on in here, but to be able to interpret what's going on in here. So we come in prayer to receive well-timed help for ourselves, but more importantly, in intercession for other people. And that may mean that God doesn't hear our prayers, doesn't answer our prayers, act immediately. It might mean that he acts 5 years' time, 20 years' time. It might mean that he acts in our prayer after we've died. But we will receive help, and that help will be well-timed, and therefore targeted and useful and helpful, and that help will be received in such a way. Now, one of the problems is that all of us have a kind of a messianic complex. We want to help people, but very often the help we give, in fact, doesn't help, but hurts people. We belittle people. We put them down. We do damage by blundering it. You know, we have the best of intentions, but we put our foot and our mouth where our foot and mouth shouldn't go, let alone our hands should never go. Well-timed help. Well-timed help. The story of my ministry is mistimed help. The story of my marriage is receiving help. No, so what's worship then? Why do we approach God in the divine service? To receive mercy from God, to receive grace to help in time of need. Now, which part of the divine service does that happen?
Yes.
You're getting the thing, right? Yes, the whole thing. And you won't understand the whole liturgy and the way it's constructed unless you see that it designs to put you in the place where you can, with boldness and confidence, freedom of speech, approach God with a good conscience and receive well-timed help. Right from the beginning, where you begin with the invocation, recollection of baptism, when you come as a beggar, where you confess your sins and you seek absolution, mercy from God, supremely in the Kyrie, the beggar's cry, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy. And in the glory we repeat, have mercy upon us, hear our prayer. In the divine, we make our collect, pray the collect, we hear the word of God, we hear the sermon, we with boldness and confidence approach God the Father through Jesus, together with Jesus in the prayer of the church, to gain well-timed help for who? For the church, the world, and people in need. We come to God in Holy Communion, God the Father and Jesus, who hosts the meal, and we receive grace and mercy to help in time of need. And then we're sent out at the end of the service with the blessing of God to bring God's well-timed help, His grace, His blessing to all the people we meet in the following service. So you can see the whole divine service from one angle. A whole divine service is listening to the voice of God. The whole divine service is drawing near to God. The whole divine service is receiving mercy and finding grace to help for ourselves and other people in time of need. The important thing is not that we help others, but that God helps us, and that we have the boldness and confidence to approach God to do what we are unable to do, which is to give gracious help to people who need it desperately. Break.